Hello, David. Welcome back to another episode of Reverse Engineering Crime Scene Investigations. We're here on our public channels so that people can enjoy your unique style of solving crimes, derived, of course, from your favorite detective mysteries featuring Sherlock Holmes. And today we're going to be focusing on Jamal Khashoggi and is it Gareth Williams?
Yeah, Gareth Williams is the spy in the bag, the MI6 spy who was found naked and his body heavily decomposing in a North Face sports bag in 2010.
Wow. You know, and it's interesting, in our conversations leading up to today's episode, I'm embarrassed to say that I have not heard about this story before. And although it was fairly high profile, what do we know about this guy, Gareth Williams?
Well, he was a brilliant mathematician, graduated from Cambridge University, and some people say that I was pretty cool as a mathematician and I graduated from Cambridge University. So we have something in common, except he was a Welshman and I'm an Englishman. Anyway, this guy joined GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters, where in the late 60s and early 70s, they invented a system of sending secure communications over insecure networks using public key infrastructure. And that is the foundation of the bridge that we keep talking about. And you've been displaying from time to time. The particular bridge you display is the 2013 incarnation of the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, which is different fundamentally, not fundamentally, but with certain very interesting aspects from the 1999-2001 bridge that shows the master server of the Twin Towers, Wells Fargo, on it. But anyway, so back to Gareth Williams. He was assigned or seconded from GCHQ to MI6, which is the international intelligence arm of the British Secret Services. And unfortunately for him, he seems to have hacked into the diary of one Bill Clinton, which most likely showed Bill Clinton's journeys to little St. James's Island, run by Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile pimp, and would probably have meant that someone at a very high level in the American government would have understood that the pedophile pimping blackmail ring might have been exposed by this Welshman, and therefore they decided they were going to whack him in a very gratuitously cruel way. Over to you.
So, okay, let me take a step back here. We've heard quite a bit about GCHQ. Everyone from Quinn Michaels to Matt Tate, of course, used to work for GCHQ. Quinn Michaels used to speak about it quite a lot because of the circular shape of it. He speculated there was a particle collider there. But I'm most interested in talking about this guy, Gareth Williams. So he's working for GCHQ, which Bill Binney has said is not just the British equivalent of NSA. Bill Binney said that GCHQ and NSA are in fact one in the same, essentially the same organization. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me back up here, Jason, because we have discussed a procedure for moving from a current crime, which is the Jamal Khashoggi, back through the probable perpetrators, or the ones that we might relate over the Bridge of Pride. And, you know, I don't want to override your suggestions, but what I thought might be interesting is if we demonstrate that the MO of the probable method of killing Jamal Khashoggi can take us back to the Serco's Bridge of Pride, and then when we flip to the paid component, and I guess this is a bit of a teaser for our listeners, we can perhaps demonstrate that the way in which Jamal Khashoggi appears to have been murdered takes us back to a perpetrator who would be connected, or is very likely connected, to the particular way that Gareth Williams was murdered. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And in fact, before we do any of that, I do want to remind people that this is going to be a precursor to the Only on Patreon show, of course, that we're doing every week. And I want to encourage anyone who might be watching on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth to go over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and that's David's page, which we're showing right now on screen. You can get to it from patreon.com. David is doing really unique research, and I could not be doing this show without David. So if you are watching, please get onto patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. David has got all of our videos that we've done together on there, as well as some posts that he does on his own. So there's going to be a lot of exclusive content that you get from patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. So David, back to Jamal Khashoggi. You want to talk about the method, right?
Yeah, absolutely. See, going back to the Sherlock Holmes story, Study in Scarlet, what I hope to do, and I think we're succeeding pretty well, is work with you and our collective audiences, and together we reverse engineer the crime scene, and together we find the clues, or identify the clues, or exclude the clues that might have been placed at the crime scene, until we find a perpetrator, and then take that perpetrator, which was probably a matrix or a network. The RCMP have this wonderful phrase of virtual floating matrix, and then see if that virtual floating matrix, or the mens rea, or the MO of the perpetrator, describes other crime scenes, like the Gareth Williams one. So Sherlock Holmes, in A Study in Scarlet, said that there are many people who, given a series of events, will tell you what comes to pass. There are very few people who, given an event, will tell you the circumstances that led up to it. So I believe the Jamal Khashoggi crime scene takes us back, when we try this reverse engineering technique, to a bridge of pride, or operated by Serco, and that will take us back to an organization in Washington called the Department of Justice Pride, which was set up by the Clintons and Field McConnell's sister in 1994. Does that make sense?
It does. So again, in your technique, you're basically identifying unique markers, technological or otherwise, of a crime, and then using those to tie those, in the case of a technological signature, to a particular technology. And in this case, we're talking about Khashoggi was purportedly, dismembered and chopped up inside the Saudi embassy in Turkey. So yeah, I mean, let's explore that.
Yeah, and the particular technology that I sometimes call it a meta patent, is this Jerome Lemelson's prisoner tracking patent, where prisoners' privileges are upgraded or downgraded depending on whether they follow the rules and procedures that they've been given, as assessed by, and this is really the extraordinarily dangerous concept, as assessed by expert system, artificial intelligence, or fuzzy logic algorithms. That is to say, whether or not the prisoner behaves himself is not assessed by a human being, like the person who set up the Department of Justice Transport, JPATS organization in 1984, which was Phil's sister, but by a computer. So, there's not much room for compassion, which is why I'm highly intrigued by the level of gratuitous cruelty that appears to be visited on the body of Jamal Khashoggi, and for that matter, of Gareth Williams. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, Khashoggi's got a really interesting past. He, of course, has been seen in photographs with the Mujahideen. He's been seen in photographs with Al-Waleed bin Talal, and he's spoken in a sort of positive light about Osama bin Laden. So it seems like there is a faction within the Saudi royal family that is opposed to President Trump, and Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, of course, who is he king yet, David, or he will become king? Mohammed bin Salman?
He's the crown prince that will become king, I believe.
Right. So, but he seems to be essentially in charge of Saudi Arabia, and he's friendly with Donald Trump. He's got a good relationship with Donald Trump. We know there's a rivalry between Al-Waleed bin Talal and Trump. Al-Waleed bin Talal purchased Trump's yacht when Trump went bankrupt. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and you see, that's really interesting, because going back to Jamal Khashoggi, I think there are some very interesting clues as to what happened before he went into the consulate and what came out of the consulate. And if you look at these connections, or the thread of the connections, what I'd like your listeners, or the listeners, to look at is this body double. Maybe you could just put the picture up of the body double, and maybe we can comment on that.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, from a physical point of view, they look like they're about the same size, these two. Mm-hmm. And they've got the glasses, obviously, and the beard. Apparently, it's a false beard for the guy called Mustafa al-Madani. But what's particularly interesting to me, Madani is wearing Khashoggi's clothes.
How do we know that this guy is intended to be a body double of Khashoggi?
Well, because he went into the consulate shortly afterwards, or before Khashoggi went in, and he came out wearing Khashoggi's clothes, and then he went to a number of spots, the Blue Mosque. I don't know where the Blue Mosque is in Istanbul, and it's considered he was being used as a decoy, so that whoever put this together could say, well, he wasn't killed at the consulate, because he came out of the back door and he went around the town and he disappeared, right? So this fellow, Mustafa al-Madani, apparently flew into Istanbul the night before. And that's a very interesting clue, because these people on the Bridge of Pride, if you will, they work in a very coordinated and synchronized way, because you don't want your suspects to be lingering around the crime scene too long. So you don't want the folks that are part of the hit team to arrive too early, and you want them as quickly as possible after the crime has been committed, or almost simultaneous with the crime being committed, to act as a decoy. Now, I'm going to not put you up against the wall here, Jason, but apparently Khashoggi has been dismembered. Yeah. So what do you notice about the clothes that this body double is wearing?
Well, they don't appear to be disrupted in any way. He doesn't...
There's no blood, right?
Right.
I mean, so you've got the same shirt, as far as I can tell.
Oh, yeah.
Same jacket, same trousers. So going back to the Sherlock Holmes...
This guy has more hair than Khashoggi.
Yeah, I know. So he's not a perfect body double. But to a careless observer and the average description, he might have been described as an elderly guy, rather portly, about the same age, bearded, with glasses, with a bluish shirt and a jacket. So most average observers who got a passing glimpse of that would not necessarily have described him as balding, although obviously Khashoggi is.
Right, and certainly on low-resolution surveillance video, like what we're looking at right here, this could
close enough.
Could be a convincing double. David, before we proceed with this, I'd like to ask you something, because this use of body doubles, it's something that's occurred to me before. We've spoken quite a lot about the fact that Al-Waleed bin Talal is a major shareholder. His Kingdom Holdings owns 45% of the Four Seasons Hotel, which is a hotel within the Mandalay Bay where the Las Vegas shooting took place. And of course, there is a visual effects expert out there on YouTube called HDR CFX Cornwall, who used a technique called photogrammetry to reconstruct the hotel room in a 3D modeling application. location. And when he overlaid his 3D model of the hotel on an actual photograph of the hotel, the exterior out the window of the photograph of the rest of Las Vegas did not match. When HDR CFX Cornwall adjusted his 3D model so that it was representing the 34th floor instead of the 32nd floor, all of the 3D items, the buildings and things outside the window, suddenly matched. So this was strong evidence that the shooting took place from the 34th floor, not the 32nd floor. Additionally, we've seen some evidence that indicates that the windows were broken after the shooting. We've seen evidence that indicates that the Las Vegas Metro PD or someone staged the crime scene in that room on the 32nd floor. Certainly no one would argue that there's been a lot of confusing stuff about the Las Vegas shooting. And when you now mention Jamal Khashoggi's use of a body double, it takes me back to this photograph of a guy who we ultimately determined was Jason Buffman. He's this guy standing right here. He's holding a small bag. He is purportedly been called away from a baseball game in an emergency situation to come to the Tropicana Hotel. And I don't have this video ready right now, but we've viewed it many, many times. These individuals here are wearing Las Vegas Metro PD uniforms, and the point person in this little brigade of ostensibly SWAT team members has a mohawk, which would seem to defy the grooming regulations for the Las Vegas Metro PD, but would possibly fit the characteristics of someone who might be a mercenary or something like that. So I come back to my original question. Why would we go to such an effort to call one particular security guard into work in the midst of all this chaos? And it's particularly interesting given how similar Jason Buffman appears, particularly on surveillance video, when compared to Mohammed bin Salman. My question is now emphasized that you've brought up this body double for Jamal Khashoggi. Is Jason Buffman the Las Vegas body double for Mohammed bin Salman?
Well, those are very legitimate questions. And remember, one of the sort of acronyms that we use in these reverse crime scene engineering ideas is the 6 S's. That is script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil. Now, in every case when you have an elaborate hit like this, whether it's a high-value target or a mass casualty event, a lot of organization goes into it to get the right people with the right skill set in the right place at the right time. That is to say, it's a sort of military-grade or black ops operation, because everything has to be synchronized. So going back to the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, operated in the mode of Bridge of Pride, if you will, you need to get some really sick individuals deployed in the right place at the right time if one of your objectives is to visit unbelievable cruelty on a human being and record a snuff film and transmit that to the people who need to be scared into silence or cooperation. So going back to that Federal Bridge, you've got organizations on that Federal Bridge, and if you zoom in to the at sort of 9 o'clock at the Federal Bridge loop, you can see those 3 characters, which I think are actually fundamental as suspects in these kind of killings, high-value targets or mass casualty events. You've got the state of Illinois, which it's not us that have established that, but it is the most corrupt state in the union, where 4 of the last 7 governors have been in jail, the last one I think for racketeering. Dennis Hastert, of course, is a pedophile pimp, former Speaker of the House on 9/11, who would have, if Bush and Cheney had been killed, he would have become, under the laws of succession, if that's the right word, the de facto president of the United States, right?
Yes.
But then you've got this bloody group in the Department of Justice. Now, I don't know what significance your listeners place on this, but when Bill Clinton and I believe Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, decided to establish, and actually probably it was far more likely to be Hillary Clinton than Bill, when they decided to set up the Department of Justice Pride organization, maybe you could just pop in the logo there and look at who are the participating members of DOJ pride. And it really spooks me, and it should spook every American, because what you have there is, from memory, while that's coming up, you have the United States Marshal. DOJ pride represents the LGBT community amongst the United States Marshal Service, the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons, the Office of Justice Programs, and so on and so on. And what I'm saying, so what impact does that have, i.e. sexualizing justice, if you will, or weaponizing justice based on the sexual orientation of the investigator? I would say, for example, Jason, you and I, whether we're homosexual or not, has nothing to do with our capability of investigating a crime. And if, for example, we were activists like, what's that organization, Radical Lesbianism?
Right.
If we went into a crime scene where we believed that the crime had been committed by a radical lesbian, maybe we'd make sure that the justice system, the wheels turned really, really slowly. And the radical lesbian was able to skate away from the crime scene, and we framed someone else for it, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is a disgraceful, despicable organization. No disrespect to people whose sexual orientation is different from mine, but there is no role for DOJ pride within the justice system of the United States. And if Trump really wanted to drain the swamp, one of the first organization he should disband is DOJ pride.
I'm sure he would be met with a lot of political opposition if he were to do that. This is a highly polarizing subject. We're just looking at the mission statement here for the DOJ Pride, and it's the recognized employee resource organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer employees and their allies in all U.S. Department of Justice offices, boards, divisions, the ATF, BOP, I don't even know what BOP is.
The Bureau of Prisons.
Got it. DEA, FBI, U.S. Marshal Service, OJP.
Office of Justice Programs.
Okay. USAO.
I'm not sure about that. ATF, incidentally, is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Now, let me just back up here. That is to say, this organization was set up in 1994. So you've got to try and correlate the quality of investigation of crime scenes against what might happen if the DOJ Pride organization was handling the investigation. So let's go to, for example, the Murrah building bomb.
Yeah.
Where they placed bombs under the daycare center, Jason.
Yeah.
Right, to kill the children. Right, and then Timothy McVeigh eventually ended up being transported by Christine Marcy, who is a lesbian and I believe a radical lesbian, on Con Air, or the JPATS program, Justice, Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, to the prison at the Supermax jail, and he went into a cell. I think on one side there was Ramzi Youssef, and on the other side Ted Kaczynski. Well, Ted Kaczynski, remember, is the Unabomber. So I think these people in DOJ Pride, they learn nothing, because look at this recent wave of parcel bombs sent through the mail. Well, what's the difference between the MO of that and the Unabomber allegedly attributed to Ted Kaczynski?
Yeah, it's quite similar, and interesting to note. Just as a quick aside, USAO is the United States Attorney's Office. So, as you pointed out, David, this DOJ Pride organization would seem to create a sort of its own sub-organization that transcends all these separate divisions. Now, I got to imagine that the Department of Prisons and the FBI and the DEA and all these things are separate in order for there to be some checks and balances and some oversight. And when we create this unifying body that if you happen to be LGBTQ in one of these organizations, you're now connected in a way that someone who's not in that community is not. Is that how we want these federal agencies to operate?
Well, I don't think so. And remember JFK's comment about infiltration instead of invasion.
Right.
Now, and so what I'm saying is, how old is the Radical Pride organization? Well, let me go back to World War II. The most famous spy ring in perhaps World War II was known as the Cambridge Five, right? And the Cambridge Five, many people say that the late Victor Rothschild, he died in 1990, was the fifth man. Well, the late Victor Rothschild has a very important historical role here, and this comes back to, in many ways, Jamal Khashoggi's murder. He was, or lent his apartment in London to Anthony Blunt and Guy Burgess. And they used to have, no, Victor Rothschild. And Victor Rothschild's, apparently, one of his ways of getting sexually excited was to keep his socks on. He got known as Socks on Rothschild, and he would, sorry if this offends your audience, he'd sodomize Anthony Blunt while Anthony Blunt strangled an adolescent boy. Right? It's about as sick as you can get. But my point is, the purpose of this brutal approach is to gather intelligence that can be used for the purposes of blackmail. Right?
Wow.
So this was a homosexual pedophile ring that came out of Cambridge, that was adopted, adapted, and refined and targeted by the Rothschild family, and used to infiltrate Germany, the United States, and various other allied countries after the Second World War. So Victor Rothschild was in Paris at the end of World War II, and he masterminded the transition from the Special Operation Executive, which had people behind enemy lines, about 13,400 agents, I believe, into the OSS, which then transformed into the CIA. So my premise is that DOJ Pride and its predecessor organizations have totally penetrated your 18 intelligence agencies, in which case President Donald Trump is not getting any useful information from any of them. Over to you.
It's quite shocking to think about these weird old guys sort of sodomizing each other and doing all these, crazy, strangling people, and it's so bizarre. I mean, as you said, we've said many times, this is this part of this conspiracy that's just so vast and crazy. It's difficult to, when you hear it, it's difficult to even accept it. And that's right. And that's why I've struggled for many weeks or months, is how do I take what a lot of people, when I launch into my monologues, their eyes glaze over, or they say, I don't want to go there, David. How do I break it down? And I think you've helped me enormously here, into a form of edutainment, if you will, where essentially what I think you and I are doing, we're doing audio-visual scripts that someone could turn into a movie or a TV series or whatever, where we reverse engineer with the audience a high-profile crime, find if there's a match between the signature of the crime scene and various patented devices, like the Lemelson's prisoner tracking device, going back to the custodians of those devices. And that's why it's so important. It's not the operator of the patented device, it's the custodian that has the authority to grant the operator of the patented device a license, maybe a time-lapse license, to use a particular patented devices for 30 hours on 911, which would allow them to track prisoners in and out of the various crime scenes associated with 911, and upgrade or downgrade the privileges of those prisoners, which may include some kind of sexual reward or a night in a cell with an underage child. Over to you. Yeah, it's all very shocking, David. So, all right, let's take it back to the murder of our friend Gareth. Well, I mean, what was ever determined about what happened to Gareth Williams?
Well, they think it was the black art. So let me just, if I may, go back to Jamal Khashoggi, because
Sure.
what I'm inviting the listeners and yourself to consider is, let's go down the Jamal Khashoggi crime scene to see if the behavior of the individuals or the SWAT team is consistent with the use of Jerome Lemelson's prisoner tracking, where the privileges are upgraded or downgraded based on expert system, artificial intelligence, or fuzzy logic algorithms. See if we can identify who might have had custody of that patented system. And then when we flip to the paid component, with Patreon,
Right.
we can invite people to come into that network where we actually discuss how those two crimes are connected, both in terms of MO and mens rea, with the use of that Jerome Lemelson patented device. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I'll take this opportunity to remind those watching on YouTube or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth that people should also be going over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and sponsor David on patreon.com. David is doing tons of amazing research, and David has created this show with me, so we wouldn't be able to do this without David, and I hope that people will sponsor David on patreon.com. The type of videos that we're creating, David, are almost universally panned by YouTube and categorized as videos that are not suitable for advertising. So I know a lot of people have become accustomed to watching YouTube for free and seeing whatever they want, but I think we're entering into a post-advertising era where if you really want information that is in your best interest, we can't rely on the corporate agenda, the advertiser-driven agenda. We're trying to create a new model, so we definitely want to encourage viewers to become sponsors. This is certainly a viewer-supported program, and it's very important that David has our continued support on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. So, okay, back to Khashoggi, David. What were you going to tell us about that?
All right, so his body double arrives in Istanbul the night before and stays at, I think the hotel was called Movenpick. I don't quite know when he went to the Saudi consulate, right? Mm-hmm. But the intriguing thing is, if he comes out of the back of the consulate with Khashoggi's clothes and there's no blood on the clothes, what I'm saying, going back to the Sherlock Holmes stuff, when poor Mr. Khashoggi entered the consulate, he was greeted by someone who stripped him. Now, why do you strip a man before evidently torturing and dismembering him? Does that remind you of any incident associated with, or apparently associated with, Christine Marcy, Jason?
Well, maybe the Mendenhall baby situation?
Yeah, exactly. So back in 1978, in November 1978, Christine Marcy apparently conceived a Mendenhall's baby. Now, when I first saw that, as you know, I'd never heard of that idea of Mendenhalling, and we found a definition in the Urban Dictionary that was pretty striking. But the word humiliation came to play, right?
Right.
So the idea of Mendenhalling someone apparently is to sodomize them, mount them from the rear, preferably in front of a large audience, and roll them over and see the humiliation in their eyes. Now, unless someone has found some better explanation of the term Mendenhall's baby in that Washington Post article, I'm assuming the objective was for someone to Mendenhall Christine Marcy, who would go on to become the most powerful bureaucrat in the United States of America, because she was a charter or founder member of the Senior Executive Service, where today about 7,000 to 9,000 of members of the Senior Executive that have the civilian status equivalent to generals or admirals run your country for you, right? They're unelected, they're opaque, and they have some kind of value system which perhaps isolates them from the consequences of their action, which could include incarcerating in the 90s nearly 1 million Americans.
Right.
Where I think there's an extraordinary talent pool if you want to commit the kind of crimes that are probably being committed of Jamal Khashoggi. So Mendenhalling, that's it. To mount someone from behind while they're in the fetal position on the ground, after the deed is complete, you roll them over and see the humiliation in their eyes. This is best accomplished in front of a large audience. So going back to Edgar Hoover, who said, well, the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with the conspiracies so monstrous they cannot believe it exists. I would say it behoves the people who are investigating the murder of Jamal Khashoggi to find out who might be in a position to mendenhall a senior bureaucrat back in 1978, such as Christine Marcy, Phil McConnell's sister. And lo and behold, the net closes in. We find out that Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill, is in Washington in 1978, November 1978, apparently as the personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Wow.
Which is the most powerful committee, I believe, in the Senate.
What is he doing there? I thought this guy was something in the British government, wasn't he?
Well, he became, in 1994 through 1997, the Minister of Defense.
For England?
For the United Kingdom. And during that period, that was when Serco got the contract to train air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur, right?
Wow.
Which is very interesting because those, or the next generation of air traffic controllers, would have probably been instrumental in handing off MH370 to a series of waypoints that was not intended to take them to Beijing. But I digress. So going back to Nicholas Soames.
Yeah.
Nicholas Soames is the brother of Rupert Soames, who's the chief executive officer of Serco, right?
Boy, that's crazy.
And Nicholas Soames is alleged to have threatened Princess Diana, who was ostensibly investigating and upsetting the British export of landmines,
right?
But I think more likely was well on the way to discovering that Jimmy Savile was operating with Jeffrey Epstein, a pedophile, pimp, and blackmail network.
Well, of course, that was unknown. Jimmy Savile was only discovered posthumously to have been a pedophile and a necrophile and a crazy rapist. But in 1997, when Diana died, nobody knew about that.
Oh, no, that's not true. Everyone in the BBC would have known about it, certainly at the senior level. A friend of mine by the name of Greg Drake is the former director of the BBC. He was the director of the BBC through 911. And if you recollect, it was the BBC that announced that building number 7 had come down in New York about 20 minutes before it did.
Yes.
So what I'm saying, essentially, Jimmy Savile was operating a pedophile, pimping, and blackmail network for decades. And he trapped a huge number of people, including, I believe, members of the royal family. And everyone can say how dastardly and evil it is for someone to be a pedophile and abuse children, but they seem to miss the chance that these people are using, well, for example, a prisoner tracking system to take a target who's a heterosexual who believes that they are interested in adults of opposite sex, and moving them into an environment which might be involved like a child brothel at Hull House in Chicago, getting them on drugs or get them drunk or whatever, and have them wake up in bed with a child, perhaps an abused child, beside them. And of course, if that happens to anyone, whoever has the pictures, sexualized and videotape pictures of those episodes, owns that individual for the rest of their career. And I would say that applies to the Clintons. Over to you.
Yeah. So there's so many things racing through my mind when you were talking about Nicholas Soames and the Mendenhall baby. I want to go back to this definition because this is one thing in particular that I think people are going to have a difficult time really understanding. Now, of course, this definition that we're referring to, Mendenhall, this is from the Urban Dictionary, which I do believe anyone can put this in there, and this definition has come from someone who goes by GoPack, and it was put in there January 25th, 2011. Now, when did you begin your broadcasts with Field McConnell on Able Danger?
2000. My first conversation with Field was 2006 in December, and I learned then that he had a sister who he didn't really know what she did, but was a powerful bureaucrat in Washington. So I immediately researched her, and I tried to find every reference or quote that she'd ever made. Mm-hmm. And then I got that Washington Post article, which I think was written by Judy Hall, who's now dead.
Judy Mann.
Judy Mann, that's right. And then I found that reference in respect to Christine Marcy's career, which was about 6 paragraphs down. I think you found it. Whether it's been scrubbed now, I don't know.
No, still here.
So my first knowledge of Mendenhall's baby was that article, and my jaw dropped. And you and I have talked about that subsequently. I've talked about it with Field. I blasted it around the world on my site as well. No one has come back with any convincing explanation other than the woman appears to have been Mendenhall in around November 1978, and she had her baby, who's a niece of Phil McConnell, in August of 1979, which is about the time Christine Marcy became the charter member of the Senior Executive Service, which I would suggest indicates that the Senior Executive Service goes through some kind of ritualized humiliation so that whoever controls, going back to the prisoner tracking, the organization that sets up those episodes or situations, controls the Senior Executive Service to this day. Over to you.
It's such a strange article, David, because, you know, we're well into it when that name comes up, Mendenhall's baby. And I think the casual user, or reader rather, would come across that word and presume that Mendenhall is the name of the father. But yet, that person is named nowhere else in the article. And as you say, there's no other, I mean, you type in Mendenhall and it's so bizarre, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this comes back to, you know, our discussion about Greek life societies, the oldest being in the United States, the most prestigious, I suppose, is Phi Beta Kappa of 1776, which is an interesting year for a variety of reasons. And then there's Kappa Beta Phi, which is the reverse of that. And Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary, is Kappa Beta Phi. And 17 presidents, 38 Supreme Court judges, and over 100 Nobel Prize winners are members of Phi Beta Kappa dating back to 1776. So me being something of a cynic, I'm saying, well, I wonder if the British decided, what's the point of fighting all these Americans or the colonists? Why don't we create a couple of secret societies that have some disgusting oath-taking ritual where any member of those societies is now bound to every other member because they've been, I don't know, either engaged in Mendenhalling a target or a child or being Mendenhalled, and they're too ashamed to ever reveal that they're now working on a secret agenda, which I believe DOJ Pride is working upon. Over to you.
I've got the Wikipedia page here for the word Mendenhall, and it's basically listed as a surname, a glacier. It looks like there's a lot of stuff in Juneau, Alaska named after Mendenhall. Mendenhall's Glacier is a 13.6 mile long glacier in the Mendenhall Valley near downtown Juneau. So, I mean, I would presume that someone with the name Mendenhall went and did a bunch of exploring in Alaska, but, you know, there's no medical, you know, Mendenhall's baby. And for an article in the Washington Post to introduce that name with no explanation of who it is, what the relationship to the baby is, it's very strange. It's very strange. So
Yeah.
the reason I'm focusing on this so much is because I want to establish some weight to our use of this Urban Dictionary definition. Although this is an incredibly prurient topic, it's worth focusing on because it's really so unusual. So to mount someone behind while they're in the fetal position, it gives an example of the usage where someone is saying, that chick was so hot I pretended to trip and totally Mendenhalled her. And the hashtags that it has associated with it are dry humping and things like this. It causes me to think about some testimony that I've heard only recently from Leslie Milwee. Is that a name that rings any bells for you, David? Leslie Milwee,
No,
do you know her?
No, Jason, no.
Leslie Milwee is a woman who was a news reporter at a TV station in Arkansas and who only recently has come forward in 2016 to reveal that she was sexually assaulted.
Why would I do this to myself?
She was sexually assaulted by Bill Clinton. And in her description of the sexual assault, she says that Bill Clinton came up behind her and she was unaware if he was clothed or disrobed, but that he humped her from behind and ejaculated on her. I wonder if that's not some form of Mendenhalling. He definitely humiliated her, and it's weird. Is this maybe some underground practice that's known to these Rhodes scholars and these people who are... I come back to Bill Clinton because, of course, Clinton's crime bill dramatically increased the number of people in jail, which if you were trying to draw from a pool of individuals to use for these dastardly crimes, you'd want as diverse a group of people in jail to select from as you possibly could get.
You're absolutely right. So going back to Jamal Khashoggi, the script for the murder of Khashoggi, I believe, included as a deliverable a snuff film recording his torture killing and his humiliation. So when he goes into the Saudi consulate, and it's very possible, and that's my argument, that there was a SWAT team deployed by Con Air, right? Now, Con Air, remember, was set up by Christine Marcy. In 1984, 1985, she buys a 727, a Boeing 727, with money stolen from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, and she launches what would become the world's largest long-range prisoner transportation system, where she could deploy the aircraft to places of rendition. Now, I don't know if you were aware that this woman, Gina Haspel, who is now the director of the CIA,
oh yes,
has
of course,
been deployed by Trump to go to Istanbul to investigate this torture killing, or presumed torture killing, of Jamal Khashoggi. But Gina Haspel signed off on torture killing or torture of prisoners when she was head of clandestine operations of the CIA. Now, were you aware of where she was schooled, Gina Haspel, Jason?
Well, I'm looking at Wikipedia. It says University of Louisville.
No, at school, at high school, she was schooled in the United Kingdom.
Oh.
Right? So she would have been available as a recruit for MI6.
Wow.
At a very early age, because her father was with the United States Air Force. She went to school and I think graduated. We don't use quite those terms, but presumably at around the age of 18, she's at some United Kingdom school, which might be an elite school for girls, a boarding school, just hypothetically. And I'm not saying I went to a boarding school in the United Kingdom, and I was aware, obviously or not, there are young kids, some of them were friends of mine, who exhibited homosexual behavior very early on, around the age of 12. They flirted with the older boys. Older boys would flirt with them. You roll the clock back, I presume the same applies at girls' schools. I'm not saying that's necessarily a fatal flaw in the boarding school system, but it doesn't necessarily discourage it. And if you have infiltrated into the teaching community in these elite boarding schools in the UK and presumably in the United States as well, you can perhaps identify young boys, young men, or young women who might be very useful as pedophile entrapment experts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You go back to Barack Hussein Obama, who at 7 years old was in Jakarta, and he was assigned by his communist mother, Ann Dunham, a cross-dressing male prostitute, right, called Turdy, unfortunate term, for this particular activity, in which case Barack Hussein Obama wouldn't have stood a chance. That is to say, at 7 years old, he may very well have become a homosexual pedophile entrapment expert.
Wow. So as a child, they're entrapping.
Absolutely. And you see, and then you go over to Hull House. Anyway, what I'm intrigued by is at what point do we think it's appropriate, respecting our audience, for them to understand that there is a very strong probability, a series of events which suggest that an organization such as DOJ Pride could operate on the Federal Bridge, put together a SWAT team, develop the script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil aspects with separate SWAT teams, if you will, needed to pull off a crime like the probable, and what I'm suggesting is Mendenhall snuff film killing of Adnan Khashoggi that left no blood. Jamal Khashoggi, that didn't leave any blood on his clothing, that would have allowed a body double to pick up his clothes, put on a false beard and some spectacles, go out the back of the consulate, and then act as a decoy in Istanbul, and then divert attention from the framing of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Because, for example, the people who are doing the framing may have realized that Jamal Khashoggi, in his research, he's a cousin of Dodi Fayed, or whatever his name is, right? So maybe he knew what really happened to Princess Diana. He knew about the threats that Nicholas Soames had leveled at her, that accidents will happen. He knew that she had written a note to a butler that is in the safe of some lawyer that says XXX, it is blanked out, is planning to have me killed or threatened in an accident where they'll tamper with the brakes and I'll get a head injury. Now, who XXX is, I don't know. So what I'm saying is that the MO and mens rea of the apparent killing of Adnan Khashoggi leads me, and perhaps you, Jamal, I'm sorry, back to the MO of a SWAT team deployed out of DOJ Pride. And that can lead us, when we go to Patreon, to the relationship with the brutal murder of Gareth Williams, with the MI6 spy in the bag.
Yes. And David, we're very near the end of our hour here, so I do want to remind everyone watching right now that they should go over to patreon.com. If they are not yet sponsors, please visit patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and become a sponsor of David. Of course, we appreciate all the generous sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. For these only on Patreon shows, you're going to get exclusive content by sponsoring on Patreon, and I would like to encourage all of our sponsors to share their sponsorship between Crowdsource the Truth and the guests that we have on. I'm trying to build a network here of individuals that bring important information to us, and we don't want to be bound by the agenda of a huge corporation like Google or any of these others that are relying on billionaire corporations and sponsorship from advertisers. So, David, thank you so much for queuing this all up, and we'll be back very shortly only on Patreon to talk some more about this amazingly strange disappearance, death, murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
Thank you, Jason.